In May 2024, Donald Trump was at his lowest.
He's free for now, but jail time is a possibility as Justice Juan Merchan decides what punishment Donald Trump deserves for his crimes.
He had become the first former US president to be convicted of a felony. 34 felonies, to be exact.
He could get some form of incarceration. That could be house arrest, that could be weekends in jail, or it could be up to 4 years in a state prison.
In the lobby of the courthouse in Manhattan, a tired and deflated Trump claimed to be a victim of a corrupt justice system.
This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
He had spent the entire process, from raid to arrest to trial to verdict, railing against the Justice Department and the FBI.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
And the real verdict from the people was...
Donald Trump will become the 47th president.
Not guilty. We agree with Trump. It was rigged and corrupt, and we want him back in power to fix it. So, how do you do that? How do you fix something that you say has been weaponized against you? Well, you put people in charge who described the investigations and prosecutions you faced as...
the biggest criminal enterprise the FBI had ever perpetrated against a political enemy by breaking the justice system and using it to their advantage for partisan politics.
This is Kash Patel, a regular contributor to Steve Bannon's podcast.
It's our own Kash Patel, just named the director of the FBI.
He has spent years railing against the weaponization of the Justice Department against Donald Trump and has called for the use of a constitutional guillotine, which he says is a literal metaphor.
And the term constitutional guillotine is meant as a metaphorical term to literally slice the head off of the deep state swamp monsters that have lied to you from Russiagate to Jan 6 and all the way through all of the Trump trials.
Kash Patel is one of two people Trump has put in charge of enforcing federal law under his new administration. The other person, Pam Bondi, is one of Trump's former defense lawyers. Now, in a month where US government departments are being marked by Elon Musk for elimination, it can be hard to keep an eye on what's going on inside the Justice Department and the FBI. But these two appointments are incredibly significant. We're going to take 2 episodes to look at them. And we're going to start with Kash Patel, because the job he has now been confirmed to, Director of the FBI, has a complex and sordid history. For almost 50 years, it was the job held by a figure many considered to be the most powerful man in America, FBI Director J Edgar Hoover. He used the FBI as a political weapon, and successive presidents let him. In the 50 years since his death, the American justice system has been desperately trying to transform the FBI into a beacon of fidelity, bravery, and integrity, which Hoover always claimed it was. Now, with Patel's appointment, that work is at risk of being undone. And that could have terrifying consequences. I'm Matt Bevan, and this is If You're Listening. Hoover liked to think of himself as an open-minded man.
The FBI welcomes constructive criticism, but I think we ought to always consider the source from which criticism comes.
In November 1962, the source from which criticism came was civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I still have a dream this afternoon.
It all started in the FBI branch in Atlanta, Georgia. The local paper in Atlanta had republished an article from the New York Times in which Dr. King said that the FBI wasn't doing enough to get rid of racial bias in their forces. His accusation was that FBI officers in the South, particularly in the city of Albany in South Georgia, were staffed with white Southern-born agents who were too friendly with local police and segregationists.
Now, I can easily understand that Dr. King, in an emotional moment, might have made the statement.
This is Deke DeLoach, the third highest ranked official in the FBI at the time.
The fact was that 4 out of 5 agents in Albany, Georgia at that particular time were northern-born, reared and educated.
The FBI special agent in charge at the Atlanta office read this in the newspaper and typed up a memo to the FBI director. The memo listed where the 5 agents at the Albany office were born, and it noted that Dr. King had got his facts wrong. But it ended with, recommend no further action in this matter. And maybe in a normal intelligence agency, that's what would have happened. But this wasn't a normal intelligence agency.
In a way that is true of few organizations, J. Edgar Hoover is the FBI. And that is our story. The story of a man, an organization, and their service to the nation, a story of fidelity, bravery, integrity.
Well, we'll have to see about that.
This touched off a feud between Mr. Hoover and Dr. King. In my opinion, it was a very unfortunate feud.
Fidelity, bravery, integrity, and very unfortunate feuds. See, Hoover was not happy with how this had gone down. He ordered his men to get the record corrected.
I was responsible for trying to contact Dr. King. Dr. King would not return my call.
Now, I'm definitely on MLK's side in this story, but also, I do reckon if the FBI calls you, you should probably call back. Hoover became furious. He thought this proved that Dr. King was a liar who wasn't interested in the truth.
I don't share the feeling that is been advanced by some extremists that a man, because he's born in the South, can't conduct or won't conduct a fair, impartial investigation.
Extremists. After the article came out, Hoover wanted to start spying on Dr. King with bugs and wiretaps. He began pressuring his boss, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy Sr., to allow him to do it, despite his claim that
the FBI taps telephones only with the authority of the Attorney General and only in cases involving kidnapping where a human life may be endangered or in internal security cases. And as of this morning, there are but 90 wiretaps in the entire United States.
He claimed that Dr. King had connections with dangerous communists, and after months of hassling, Bobby Kennedy agreed to allow the taps. The FBI tapped Dr. King's phones, installed microphones in his home, and also installed them in every hotel room he stayed in while travelling around the country. They didn't find evidence of connections with communist spies, but they did apparently hear Martin Luther King having a lot of extramarital affairs. Meanwhile, Hoover just could not stop ranting about the Albany office story.
I've seen some fantastic statements that made that practically all of our agents in the Deep South offices are men who've been born and reared in the Deep South.
This is from a press conference almost 2 years after Dr. King didn't return his call.
I can say that 70% of the agents in the 23 southern offices were born in the North.
Finally, Dr. King decided that it was time to sit down face-to-face with Director Hoover.
I have had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Hoover this afternoon, and I might say that the discussion was quite amicable.
The meeting might have been amicable, but as they had that meeting, there was a parcel sitting in Dr. King's mailbox. Inside was a tape recording which appeared to be of Dr. King having sex with women who were not his wife in various hotel rooms. It was a supercut of sorts. Alongside the tape recording was a typed note. The note used horrific racist insults, threatened to expose King's affairs, and then implied that the only way King could save his reputation was to kill himself within 34 days of the letter being sent, before Christmas Day, 1964. The package was unsigned, but Dr. King knew it was from the FBI. "They are out to break me," King said, in a phone call picked up by wiretaps, transcribed and sent to Hoover's office.
J. Edgar Hoover had a party trick of relating bits of juicy gossip about people in high places. Well, it turns out that the FBI director had a special squad prying into people's sex lives.
So what can we learn from this incredibly disturbing story? Well, for 48 years, the United States of America had a secret police run by a single man on a mission to preserve what he saw as American values through a massive surveillance program. Hoover used the enormous power at his disposal to spy on, intimidate, and threaten people he saw as threats to the status quo, or public enemies.
Congressman Moss believes that there's a file on 1 out of every 2 Americans.
How does the Bureau decide who is an enemy of the state? Under J Edgar Hoover, it was a combination of statute and personal taste.
Sound familiar?
You are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Hoover operated almost entirely without oversight and did not tolerate dissent from his staff. FBI upper management compromised their own morals to comply with Hoover's orders, knowing that the alternative was being demoted to resident agent in charge of the office in Fairbanks, Alaska. They anticipated his whims and acted accordingly, leading to a cultural rot from the top to the bottom. The public had no idea of who Hoover really was, and he remained incredibly popular right up until his death.
From his office, J. Edgar Hoover has placed on the entire organization his own rigid code of service, integrity, and morality.
But the 8 presidents he worked alongside knew exactly who he was. Not only did they not fire him, they changed laws to make sure that he could stay on. On the 1st of January 1965, J. Edgar Hoover turned 70. By then, he had been in office for 40 years. And that should have been the end of his time as FBI director. The law said that public servants had to retire at 70.
And knowing you as I do, Edgar, I know you won't break the law.
But President Lyndon Johnson, knowing that J. Edgar Hoover was a corrupt, deceitful blackmailer, said that the nation could not afford to let him retire.
I have just now signed an executive order exempting you from compulsory retirement for an indefinite period of time. And again, Edgar, congratulations, and accept the gratitude of a grateful nation.
On the day J. Edgar Hoover died in office 7 years later, President Richard Nixon's first response was to send aides to seal his office as quickly as possible and take custody of Hoover's treasure trove of secret files. The filing cabinets were empty. Everything in them had been shredded by his secretary. In the years since Hoover's death, as all these horrible stories came out into the open, there's been an inclination to portray him as an all-powerful villain who pulled the strings of America's political and cultural elite with blackmail.
Mr. Hoover often told Mr. Nixon about stories he had on other prominent politicians. Perhaps he took the hint.
But Hoover biographer Beverly Gage argues that the only reason he stayed in power so long was because the political elite liked what he was doing. Presidents of both major parties relied on Hoover to keep subversive movements at bay and cover up any scandals that threatened their administration.
I have asked Mr. J. Edgar Hoover to stay on as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he accepted.
By the end of the 1970s, the FBI had been significantly reformed. Part of that was thanks to the strengthened Freedom of Information Act, which gives citizens the right to request their files. But the main reason was new laws that gave the Attorney General and Congress the ability to actually find out what the FBI was up to. House and Senate intelligence committees were set up to keep an eye on the intelligence agencies. And this is where we come across Kash Patel.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Kash Patel.
2016 and 2017 were extremely crazy times to be working for the FBI.
The FBI is once again investigating his opponent.
A letter that the FBI director sent out yesterday.
The extraordinary allegation that Barack Obama had ordered wiretapping surveillance.
The Russians interfered in our election.
Donald Trump sacked the FBI director today.
If you want to know more about that, it's the subject of the first 2 entire seasons of this podcast. Understandably, this came under a lot of scrutiny from Congress, particularly the House Intelligence Committee. Kash Patel was the senior counsel for the chairman of that committee and spent his time there spreading misinformation about the FBI and Justice Department.
We are going to remove the weaponization of the intelligence community for political purposes.
He wanted everyone to believe that the real scandal wasn't Russia interfering in the election, but the FBI's conduct in investigating it. And that's basically what he's been up to since then, spreading misinformation about everything from the Russia investigation to the 2020 election to the January 6th attack on the US Capitol building.
The January 6th truth has finally entered the American bloodstream writ large. The insurrection that never was.
In 2022, he published a children's book about it all.
I have written the first ever children's Russiagate book
called The Plot Against the King, with a king that looks a lot like Donald Trump thinks he looks. It's actually a trilogy. There have been many plots against the king. In 2023, he published a book for adults with basically the same storyline called Government Gangsters, the Deep State, the Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy, which included in the back a list of people that he thinks are deep state operatives. It's a super lazy list. Basically, if you searched online for people who criticised Trump or people who didn't do what Trump wanted them to do, these would be the top results. It includes Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Hillary Clinton, as well as the last 5 US Attorneys General and the last 3 directors of the FBI.
The Senate has confirmed Kash Patel to be the next director of the FBI, despite Democratic concerns that he might look to operate as a Donald Trump loyalist and use the powers of the FBI to go after adversaries of the president.
They are afraid that President Trump is going to come in and actually use the law to prosecute those who broke it. Whether they're in government, whether they're in the private sector, civilians, and yes, even if they're in the media, if they participated in a conspiracy to rig elections and break the law or do other corrupt activities, you'll be prosecuted.
Days after Patel's appointment, it was announced that Dan Bongino, a former Secret Service agent turned far-right podcaster, would serve as his deputy. If you're wondering who that is, here he is talking on his podcast 6 weeks ago.
I am absolutely certain this is the biggest political scandal of our time, and that the FBI has been hiding a massive fake assassination plot to shut down the questioning of the 2020 election.
Yeah, so he's a conspiracy theorist. But that's not all. This is from that same episode.
The left has a problem. You know what the problem is? Everybody hates you! You suck!
So that guy and Kash Patel at the head of the FBI. Nobody is more excited about all this than Steve Bannon.
This is a glorious day. You know why it's glorious? Kash Patel's director of the FBI.
And to be honest, that's the most chilling thing for me. A couple of months ago, when Patel was first announced as Trump's nominee, Steve Bannon engaged in a little bit of nostalgia.
When I was a kid growing up in our parish in Richmond, Virginia, St. Paul's Catholic Church and then St. Benedict's later, the most revered guys and the dads in the parish were not the doctors or the lawyers. The revered guys were we had two FBI agents, field agents. They were revered. The FBI, J Edgar Hoover's FBI.
Okay, but
that's not the FBI today. The FBI today is thoroughly incompetent and corrupt. It has to be taken apart brick by brick, and Kash Patel is the guy to do it.
If that's true, and it is taken apart brick by brick, we all just have to hope that the thing that replaces it isn't
J Edgar Hoover's FBI.